When rabbinic study circles weren't articulating Jewish ideas as precepts and organizing them into collections of statutes, they were studying the Torah very carefully through a form of reading called Midrash. It is common to distinguish between legal or halachic Midrash and non-legal or Aggadic Midrash. This imperfect but useful distinction is sometimes corrected by those who prefer a distinction based on history. Such people call the legal or halachic Midrash Tannaitic Midrash, since it was created in the Tannaitic period. Whether one calls it Tannaitic Midrash or legal Midrash, this rabbinic technique of reading is an important component of the Talmud. During the 2nd century, there were 2 prominent schools of Midrash in Palestine. By the way, when I say schools, do not imagine large institutions of learning. What I mean is a method of study shared by a group of scholars trained in the same way. The 2 main schools are known as the School of Rabbi Akiba and the School of Rabbi Ishmael. The Midrash associated with Rabbi Akiba's school is more likely to view a given feature of the biblical text as a textual marker that requires the interpretive production of meaning. For example, biblical Hebrew has cases in which it is standard to repeat a word. Rabbi Ishmael's school says that this is not a marking for additional meaning because it is just a byproduct of Hebrew grammar. However, Rabbi Akiva's school treats it as a redundancy that requires extra interpretation. A sizable corpus of Tannaitic legal Midrash has been preserved in a number of works of rabbinic literature. No extant work of Tannaitic Midrash exists on the book of Genesis. This makes sense because Genesis has very little legal material. The 4 remaining books of the Torah inspired active traditions of legal Midrash in both schools, and several whole works and additional fragments have survived to the present. There has been a long-standing scholarly debate about the relationship between Midrash and Mishnah as styles of learning in the rabbinic period. Some would like to see Midrashic reading of the Bible as the basis for Mishnaic legal statements. Others think that Midrash came later and was used as a reverse justification for the statements in the Mishnah. This is something like a chicken and egg argument. It makes the most sense to say that the relationship between these styles of learning is bidirectional, with a precept sometimes causing an interpretation of a verse, and the special qualities of a verse at times leading to the production of new precepts. Here are a few more important observations about the relationship between Midrash and Mishnah. First, the Mishnah is associated with the Midrashic school of Rabbi Akiba. Though the Mishnah does contain names of some contributing rabbis to both schools, many of the important Rabbi Ishmael contributors are never cited in Mishnah. Second, extant works of Tannaitic Midrash were all produced later than the Mishnah. Rabbi Akiba's school Midrashic texts often reference the Mishnah verbatim. Third, despite the fact that works of Tannaitic Midrash may have undergone final redaction 100 years or more after the end of the Tannaitic period, no post-Tannaitic rabbis are cited within these works. This is important because it testifies to a type of canonization of these works by the beginning of the post-Tannaitic period. And finally, though works of Midrash were compiled later than the Mishnah, an idea contained in Midrash might be ontologically prior to its parallel found in the Mishnah. In other words, the biblical interpretation may stand behind the reference in the Mishnah. In the rest of this video, we'll compare a passage of Tannaitic Midrash with a Mishnah from our chapter. First, let's recall the basic textual problems of Deuteronomy 19 that we have discussed in earlier videos. 1. The text says that witnesses come in pairs, but uses singular nouns and verbs to talk about the witness. And 2, though the text has strong feelings about what happens to a lying witness, it makes no provisions for establishing the lie. The story of Susanna takes advantage of the notion of a pair of witnesses to create a method for establishing the lie. The witnesses are separated and disagree about the facts. It is a conspiracy, and both are liars and are executed. The Mishnah continues to highlight the importance of consistency in the two witnesses' testimony. The Mishnah in Tractate Sanhedrin even mentions an episode in which the legendary rabbinic figure Ben Zakkai interrogated witnesses about the roots of a fig tree, much as Daniel had asked the two witnesses about the tree. But the rabbis also worry about over-eager capital conviction. What if witnesses made factual errors, or if only one was lying? Thus, they turn the kind of interrogation performed by Daniel and Susanna into a basic criterion for establishing valid legal testimony, but not a criterion for guilt as a false witness. In other words, for rabbinic jurisprudence, inconsistency between the witnesses makes their testimony unacceptable, but it doesn't generate a criminal designation as false witnesses. How does the approach towards false or contradictory testimony in Midrash compare to that of the Mishnah? Let's take a look at a passage from Sifrei, which is the name of the Tannaitic Midrash on Deuteronomy. Sifrei is associated with the school of Rabbi Akiva. Sifrei 189 says, in reference to Deuteronomy 19, "This teaches that one is not obligated as a false witness until one contradicts oneself." It is not clear what textual marker the Midrash is using to derive this precept, nor is it clear what sort of contradiction the Midrash is referring to. One could easily understand this line according to the Susanna paradigm as referring to one co-witness contradicting the other. But the ensuing text does not read it that way. Instead, the text continues, "From here they said that witnesses are not considered false until they cause themselves to be determined false." This is a citation to the Mishnah, as is typical of Akiba school Midrash. The next section is more fruitful for considering how Midrash works. The text continues, "And how do we know that a witness makes himself into a liar? For the verse says, 'And behold, a lying witness is the witness.'" The Midrash is attentive to strangeness in the biblical text, which repeats the word "the witness" unnecessarily, and uses this extra material to claim that the witness testifies twice, once to make a claim, and a second time to confess to having lied. The Midrash continues by asking, how do we know that he can make his partner a false witness? Because it says, "And behold, he is a false witness." The Midrash understands this verse to be speaking in the third-person voice of one witness talking about another. The specific marking that generates this reading is the word "behold," the kind of word that could accompany a person's revelation of something hidden, like a magician's ta-da! The Midrash then asks, how do we know that the discovery of falsehood has to take place before the testimony has been completely vetted by the court? Because it says, "Falsehood he uttered about his brother." In order to make sense of this Midrash, one needs to vocalize the biblical verb so that instead of "he uttered," the verse says "he is uttering." This kind of creative revocalization is not uncommon in Midrash. The upshot of this Midrash is that one becomes a false witness through confession or through betrayal by a fellow witness. This contradicts the Mishnaic approach, in which one becomes a false witness based on new testimony by a second set of witnesses. The notion that the falsification of witnesses happens during the testimony stage also contradicts a ruling later on in the Mishnah, which requires not only that the testimony must be accepted, but that a verdict must actually be rendered before witnesses could be convicted as false witnesses. We have thus seen that the Midrash and Mishnah do not necessarily agree. However, the Mishnah can also incorporate and reread Midrash within its own legal context. For example, the fourth Mishnah in our chapter includes the language of "witnesses do not become false witnesses until they cause themselves to be false," which is a quote from Sifrei. Instead of imagining the witness confessing to his own falsehood, however, this line is instead explained by a scenario in which the second set of witnesses disagrees with the first set, not about the facts of testimony, but about the very possibility of the witness's presence at the scene. According to the Mishnah, the second set of witnesses shows the first set to be false by proving that they were not at the location of the crime at the time when they claimed to have seen it committed. This Mishnah, which quotes and reincorporates a line from Midrash, is foundational for establishing this as the accepted method for determining false testimony.